like to call to order this meeting. Again, welcome to everyone. We'll start with land acknowledgement. We are meeting on the lands that have been home to Indigenous nations since time immemorial. We acknowledge we are on the treaty lands of territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee. With increasing encroachment by non-Indigenous settlers in the area now known as the Township of Centre Wellington, the Mississaugas could not continue their traditional lifestyles and retreated to the villages along the Credit River, eventually settling in the Grand River Valley. The Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation uphold their treaty rights within our jurisdiction. Today, the Township of Centre Wellington remains home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to share and respect Mother Earth and are committed to building constructive and cooperative relationships with Indigenous nations. Okay. Item number 3, addendums and correction to the agenda. I'd like to move that we move item 8.13, I think it is. Item, and this is the item concerning termites. The reason I'd like to pull that from the agenda, we've received some new information in the last few days that council or that staff is going through, and I'd like to go through that with staff and then obviously bring it back to council, and we're thinking around March. So if I see sort of just head nods around council there, and that looks like that is fine, we'll remove that item for tonight. Item, yes?
The addendum of Ian Rankin as in the delegation, although I don't see him here.
Oh, yes, and I'd also like to add to item 8.2, Ian Rankin as a delegation. I don't think I don't see Ian yet, but I'm hoping that he'll show. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act?
Thank you. Yes, I have two conflict of interest, one with item 8.10 and one with item 8.11. The reason for the conflict is my husband is a senior partner at MHBC Planning, and they provided a cultural heritage or heritage impact assessment for the building in question in 8.10, and they have provided the plan of subdivision for the subdivision 8.11.
Thank you. Any other disclosures? Okay, seeing none. Approval and adoption of the minutes. And you can see them before you there. And there's any comments, questions to that? Okay. Recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meetings held November 29th, 2022, November 30th, 2022, December 7th, 2022, and December 8th, 2022, and the council meetings held on September 26, 2002, November 21st, 2022, and December 12th, 2022 be adopted as circulated. Do we have a mover for that? Ms. McDonald, seconder. Ms. Addendums, all those in favor? So moved. Okay, that brings us down to item 6, presentation and announcements. We have 6.1, Mayor's County Council report. I'll say a few words as it relates to that. So the point of this, as council's aware and maybe the community's aware, the mayor sits on county council, and as a result of sitting on county council, we obviously are going through county business, and this will be a point in time that we'll bring up sort of important things that come out of the county, just to bring the community up to date in terms of that. What we'll probably be doing in the future is we're going to invite our county councillors as well to come in and speak at this period of time. So it'll be an opportunity for them to talk about things that are happening in the county and just won't come from me all the time. So I think that's important, and important to get that message out to the community that way. So the big thing coming at this time is budgets. We just came through budgets, and the biggest thing coming out of that is we're looking at a budget of about 3.8 from the county council. And obviously that number will, it will be it'll be joined with our number eventually when we come through that process here, but that's probably the big number in terms of what happened out of County Council. There were several meetings, both at committee levels, to come through that. They went through all the committee input and then came back with at County Council at the last meeting that way, and it was passed at 3.8. Questions, comments? Okay. Councillor committee updates. And now this is the point where I look at you guys, and I know you guys are starting to be involved with committees, and yes, if you'd like to bring us up to date, that would be great. Thank you.
I had an informative meeting with the Water and Sewer Division, that committee. I am the representative on that committee, and that includes Dan and yourself and a few others. And we went through the logbook. We went through all the information. I must say I was pretty impressed at how tight and precise our data is that we are presenting to the province. And so I look forward to the future meetings. Those are quarterly, and I look forward to getting more info. But it was just more of an introduction, but looking forward to it. I did meet with community safety. I'm also the representative on community safety. I met with the executive, and we're going to have more discussions about where we go forward with community safety plans, how many of the townships are going to be involved with it, but I'm the representative for Center Wellington at the moment. And again, it was more an introduction so far. That's it.
Thank you very much. Any other councillors would like to, yes, Councillor Yvoy?
Thank you. Through you, sir. I had my first meeting at Doctor Retention, and there's definitely some work ahead, and I think it's important that council works closely and in alignment with the hospital and the Health Alliance doing the hard work, because there is much yet to be done. So again, much like Councillor McDonald, this was an early meeting, but I look forward to seeing how we can continue to support.
Perfect. Thank you for your input. Yes, Councillor Wilton.
Great, thank you. So Councillor Jefferson and I both went to the orientation for the Groves Hospital Board and met everybody. The one interesting thing is they are considering kind of changing the council representation on the board, so that might shift over the next year to 2 years. So it's early days, but they are looking into trying to change how many council representatives so they can go for more of a skills-based board. So we'll see how that unfolds, but it was a good meeting. And I also attended the Fergus BIA meeting, and I think some of you are already aware that one of the issues is benches through the winter for the downtown core. So they've passed a motion to say that that should be allowed. So I think that'll be coming forward to work through with Kirsten probably and Colin. So, but other than that, it was good. Thanks.
Thank you for that information. Any other councillors at this time? Oh, yes, go ahead.
I met with the Elora BIA on January 16th, and it's the new executive this year working through, and we set up the different committees for the events and marketing, and they're established a new committee for waste management in the downtown core. So everybody's like looking forward to a wonderfully busy 2023.
Thank you for that update. And I know garbage has always been a challenging thing in both our communities. So anyways, thank you for that. Any other inputs at this? Yes, go ahead.
Hi. First time speaker, long time admirer. I met with the Victoria Park Senior Center, and they just established their new advisory committee, which I believe later on in the agenda we're going to hopefully adopt, because it's a lot of great people looking to do a lot of great work. And again, it was just an introductory, but I'm looking forward to sitting with them. The Grand River nonprofit, I haven't had a chance to have a meeting with them yet, but looking forward to that as well, and seeing the kind folks over there. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Okay, I think we've gone through everyone at this stage. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about delegations. And how are we doing that way? So I think we're going to deal with item 7.1, Warren Zeigler, President of the, and Amy Gilbert, Vice President of the Elora Meadows Neighborhood Group, regarding item 8.3, Elora Meadows Neighborhood Multi-Use Pad Project. So, we have a staff, or sorry, how are we going to do this?
Yes, they go.
Okay. Yes, please come up. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of council and township staff. My name is Warren Zeigler. This is Amy Gilbert. We're already up. I'm the president and Amy's the vice president of the Elora Meadows Association. In 2020, we decided to get together and through COVID, as a township or as a community, build an outdoor rink for the township. Actually, just for our little neighborhood we had. So we met, there was about 25 of us. We raised $5,000 within the first 2 weeks of our little community get-together. We actually had a local contractor come in, donate his time, and we actually built a little hockey rink, an outdoor rink for the kids to spend some quality time and have a mental break from being inside for the last 2 years. In 2021, we actually raised more money over bottle drives, and we actually had a 50-50 draw. And we actually built the rink a little bit bigger that year, which was a 48 by 96. Due to not having a water supply at the time or lights, we actually asked the fire department to fill the rink, which took us 13 tanker trucks by the time we were finished to actually have the whole thing filled. Because the ground's not level whatsoever. So we actually contacted a local resident, and he actually is a designer, and he came to this design. It's actually a 60 by 120 rink size. The pad will be alone 70 by 130, because we were looking at putting in basketball nets, set of benches along where the park side is, where the playground is, and then a little bit bigger so we can put the benches so that kids can have a seat. We actually went out to Conestoga and looked at theirs, and they actually had the same design. So it was actually well built. On the back side where the laneway is, there's actually going to be a 6-foot chain link fence just to protect the neighbors from behind, so that no pucks or anything else could go behind there. So this is what we came up with as for the building of it. It'll be a 1-inch roll. I mean, it's easy to explain. It'll be concrete finish. It'll be a machine finish, so the kids can rollerblade, play pickleball, tennis, any other sport that they want to put in there at the same time. So this is what our goal is. Our goal is to raise $200,000. We've been going around collecting empties. We actually had a 50-50 draw. We raised $2,600. To date, we raised about $18,000 just for the rink alone. We actually had both the elementary schools come to have a skating day on our rink. The kids walk down from Salem Public School and from the St. Mary's. This is we got a grant from you guys regarding for the 2022 community grant. That went very well. We had about 300 people. About 300 people show up in our 75 home community. That is it for us. We would just like to say thank you to Mr. Tucker for all the work he's put into getting us where we are.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can we ask some questions?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes.
Well, you already answered one of my questions about pickleball, because that's a huge topic in Center Wellington lately. I've watched this group progress as someone who is very passionate about parks. I have to say they really have put a lot into this. I just ask again, are you going to have boards? Are you going to try and
We're gonna have boards.
auction those? Or
We're actually gonna, at the start, we're going to have a two-phase approach. We're gonna get the pad put in first,
Perfect.
and then we're gonna raise more money to put the boards in. So it'll be a full-out hockey slash recreational place for the kids.
Okay. And the past few years have been pretty difficult in our community, and we also have another rink that's closer to my house and the one that was yours. And when we were soft landing COVID, it was just so nice to see them used. And now we're hitting the weather where we actually can use them. So I really don't think this is going to go to waste, and I really think it is something that we need to put our efforts behind. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Evelyn?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a quick question, celebrating the hard work you're doing as a community. You mentioned that you'd have a 6-foot fence to catch pucks. I'm not a hockey person,
Okay.
nor do I know exactly where you are, but is 6 feet enough? And if it isn't, how close are the homes, how nearby are the homes, and how likely are they to be hit by a flying puck?
So the boards alone, actually, we had a conversation with Pat and with the township. And the boards are gonna be 3 feet high plus another 6 feet on top, so it'll be 9 feet high.
Great.
And it's probably, I'm saying about 75 meters from any house or more.
Perfect, thank you for clarifying, good luck.
No problem.
Any other questions, comments? I'd just like to thank you and your group for all the good efforts and all the hard work that you've done over the couple of years on this. I know I've been involved in a few projects in my lifetime, but I really appreciate the effort, because I know sometimes that these things are very difficult, but I can tell you're very enthusiastic and very passionate about it, and you'll do very well. Again, thank you again for coming to council and talking about this program. I think it's a very important program for our community. So.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay, our next, I think I saw Ian somewhere kind of swoop in here. So we're at item 7.2, Mr. Ian Rankin, resident, regarding item 8.2, community land needs review. Please come to the podium, Ian.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. I will be brief. And I hope this will be the beginning of more than one conversation. I start with quotations from last week's Wellington Advertiser, January 26, and it's these 4 articles that brought me here. Dave Edsit's editorial made 2 statements. Ensure an opportunity exists for divergent opinions, and informed opinion matters. The article relating to the official plan process underway to protect our heritage areas and cultural heritage landscape made 1 statement that I would like to share. These areas are important for history, our tourism, environmental stewardship, recreation, and our small town village character. Mayor Waters' comments at the Chamber, and I quote, "Biggest challenge for Centre Wellington is growth. Where and how to grow. We need to grow up, out, and intensify. This requires continuous dialogue and conversation, and managing growth won't necessarily get solved quickly." I have a few comments and concerns. Number 1, please vote to approve the proposal 8.2. for good planning reasons. The Watson Report proposal process enables good decision-making because it contributes to informed opinion. It's an opportunity for this new council to replace conflict with consensus through a time-limited 4-month step towards the democratization of our land use planning decision process. The Watson Report will be the first opportunity for citizens to respond to provincial and county directives relating to where and how to grow. Watson has a good track record. I don't know that. The only citizen in Centre Wellington that I'm aware of who has read and analyzed the Watson Land Needs Assessment for both the county and for some other county, I don't know whether it's Durham, but it's near Toronto. His opinion, and I value it, or I wouldn't have referenced it, is that what they did there should have been part of the county land needs assessment. Number 2, however, before voting yes, council needs to do a number of things. Ask questions regarding the terms of reference of the Watson contract and make it a public document. Number 2, ensure more than staff are at the report writing table. There should be reps from Habitat for Humanity. We're dealing with all sorts of housing. From the Ag Society, Neighbourhoods, Save Our Water, Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, Healthy Growth, and Heritage Centre Wellington advisory committees. Before voting, you need to ensure that the report speaks to the constraints on intensification of our heritage areas and landscapes in the county report, demonstrate the need to intensify in our protected heritage areas in order to meet the county growth targets, and address negative impacts of 5-story buildings on the low-rise character of our 2 heritage towns. And finally, you need to ask questions regarding the post-report public engagement process to get citizen input. My last article in the Advertiser, and the one that probably upset me, and that's why I'm here, is the planned triple header of mandatory public meetings for February the 22nd. It is placing the cart before the horse, and it is contrary to the intent of item 8.2 because it preempts the report. Such bundling of zoning change height bylaws is unprecedented, does not represent good planning, and has never occurred in the 50 years I have lived here in Elora. Staff needs to explain to council and the citizens the rationale for recommending 3 non-conforming zoning bylaw amendments so early in the council's new term. Knowing 2 things. Jeff Wild said last June, when speaking against 4- and 5-story buildings east of the Pearl condos, to the Metcalf Bridge, you're setting a precedent. And that precedent will mean you open the door. Anybody can come in. Secondly, neither the former council nor this council has ever received advice on those three proposed height zoning bylaw changes. How can you make an informed decision if you don't even get advice from your heritage committee? If February 22nd proceeds, councillors and citizens need to insist it requires an official plan amendment. In conclusion, the Watson report is an opportunity to change our land use planning processes for the better and in the long-term public interest. Let's choose dialogue and conversation and identify what we agree on and how to close the gaps where we differ. Residential intensification higher than 3 stories in our designated heritage areas and cultural heritage landscapes will destroy them. I welcome any questions, and normally I would stay to hear the discussion, but I have another commitment. So I'll have to wait for either the online or the advertiser to tell me what you've decided. But I would take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ian. Questions from council? I don't see any. Ian, would you do me a favor, or
Yep.
I would love to get your words.
Yep.
Could you send that and make sure that staff receive that? That would be very helpful if you could do that.
Yeah, I won't do it for a day or so, but
Okay.
I will send.
Okay.
So do you want me to send it to Carrie or to?
Yeah, to Carrie. That
Okay,
would be,
I will
yeah.
send a copy of it to Carrie, and I'll correct any errors
Okay,
in spelling in that. Thanks very much.
perfect. Thank you, Ian. Okay, consideration of reports. We're at item 8.1, Planning and Development Fee Study, report by Brett Salmon. I'd like to welcome to the podium, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Waters and Council. We have Watson and Associates economists here today to make a presentation regarding development fee study that they've been working on for the township for the last couple of years. Our last fee review was in 2004, and because of the volume of development activity in the building department and the planning department, it was time to update that study. So previously, in the previous term of council, Watson brought forward the building fee results of that analysis, and the fee was updated. So now we're proceeding with the planning and development fees. And Watson will explain the methodology. I just want to relate to council, though, that our goal with this study is to produce the fees that are required to be 100% cost recovery of staff time in the different departments that are involved in the planning review process. Back in 2004, the council at that time chose to only attempt to recover 75% of the cost. And we think that should be moved up to 100%. But the results of the study show that based on current planning volumes and current staffing levels, we're only recovering a much smaller portion of our fees. So bottom line is to meet 100% cost recovery will be a pretty significant increase in our planning fees. And that will take us a bit of time to absorb, but we'll bring back the fee bylaw itself at a future date. And also those calculations include fees for the involvement of community services staff in planning, for example, a park in a new subdivision, and the role of the infrastructure staff in a development such as a subdivision where they're out there inspecting water mains and that sort of thing. So I'll turn it over to Peter Simcisko from Watson Associates.
Thank you. Welcome, Peter.
Good evening. So thank you for the introduction, Brett, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So as mentioned by Brett, Watson and Associates were retained by the township to undertake a comprehensive review of various fees charged for processing development applications. The scope of the review included building permit fees, which, as mentioned, we brought forward that full review in 2022. And then the second phase of the review focused on the fees charged for processing planning applications, as well as the services provided by infrastructure services and community services throughout the construction phases of development projects. The review itself was undertaken with regard for a few key areas. First, the conformity with legislation, making sure that the fee recommendations we're putting forward ultimately are defensible in light of the township's legislative authority to impose fees. We'll touch on that a little bit later. As well as balancing the township's need to balance cost recovery with stakeholder interests, so questions of affordability, competitiveness, and so on, as well as making sure that we're following any industry best practices that are relevant for this type of review. So the main objectives of the assignments were to firstly look at what is it costing the township to process these various applications. So we're looking at both the direct involvement of staff that are involved in processing the applications, undertaking inspections related to development and so on, but also recognizing other direct costs that are not necessarily salaries, wages, and benefits, the capital assets that are utilized in the provision of these services as well, and other indirect costs. We are then, once we understand the cost of service, we are looking at measuring the performance of the fees that the township is currently charging for these applications relative to the cost of service. So what is the level of cost recovery that the current fees are providing? Are we close to full cost recovery, or is there a gap? Because if there's a gap, that gap has to be made up for by contributions from the general tax levy or other sources. And then finally, we're looking to make fee recommendations to provide for reasonable full cost recovery, recognizing that there may be certain application types, certain activities that it may not be in the best interest of the township to impose a full cost fee for. So we're again looking to balance this financial sustainability question while having regard for competitiveness of the township relative to its municipal comparators and broader stakeholder interests as well. So there are two pieces of legislation that we have to be aware of when undertaking this type of review. Firstly, we have the planning application fees, which fall under the jurisdiction of Section 69 of the Planning Act, which is fairly narrow in how it defines full cost recovery relative to some other statutes, where it speaks to the anticipated costs of processing by application type. And that would suggest that any cross-subsidization of Planning Act fees is not permissible. It also limits the scope of cost recovery to the cost of processing the applications. The recovery of costs related to the services provided by the infrastructure services and community services groups, again through the construction phases, fall under the jurisdiction of the Municipal Act, which is relatively broad in its definition of cost recovery, also explicitly allowing for the inclusion of administration as well as enforcement and the use of capital assets in the provision of services. And so again, the review that we have undertaken we were very cognizant of those that legislative context. So in terms of the methodology that we follow in undertaking this type of review is referred to as activity-based costing. And this methodology is really good at allowing an organization to understand costs when there's involvement from multiple business units across the organization. And this is because more traditional accounting structures are very business unit focused and aren't necessarily good at understanding total cost of service when there's, again, that involvement from multiple business units within the organization. Furthermore, the activity-based costing methodology allows us to recognize things beyond just the direct effort of staff that are involved in the processing of the applications. Again, reflect where we're able to incorporate indirect costs, those corporate overhead support costs, for example, as well as the cost of capital assets that's utilized in the provision of the services. The allocation of costs into the various application buckets or categories is accomplished by tracking the relative share of staff processing effort that's spent on individual applications. So it was a fairly lengthy process at the front end to try to understand what that process looks like for each type of application, where we sat down through multiple workshops with township staff to understand exactly what that process looks like, from the initial pre-consultation, the intake of the application, the various rounds of review by different individuals across the organization, all the way through, in some cases, to inspections that have to be undertaken, and the closure of the file ultimately. And in that processing effort, we're then, or in that mapping exercise, we're also looking at those individuals right across the organizations that are involved at different stages of that process. The bulk of the effort does come from typically planning and development, but there is involvement from other staff as well, such as, for example, from finance in terms of processing securities for development and so on. So we are in this type of review and employing this methodology, recognizing those costs as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, we do recognize the indirect or corporate support function costs as well. So recognizing that there needs to be IT to support workstations, there needs to be HR to oversee recruitment, and all of those costs or internal services allow the outwards facing departments to provide their services to the public. So there is a recognition of those indirect support function costs as well. So a major component in this review, let me just back up a step, is making sure that we're not just taking the processing effort estimates by various types of applications and going through a costing exercise, but doing that in light of the available service capacity to ensure that service levels can be achieved. And so, in other words, we have tested the time estimates that we developed with staff to ensure that they are reasonable by applying them to the average annual volume of activity, which we'll look at shortly, to ensure that the product or the overall utilization of resources is in line with the available resourcing in those respective areas. So having gone through the process of documenting the effort per planning application, and then looking at how many of different types of applications the township processes in a typical year, we're able to look at this overall utilization of staff resources in different areas. And so firstly, the table at the top of the slide here is showing us what the baseline utilization is. By baseline, we mean when we're looking at the current or historical average volumes of planning applications. The table doesn't capture the entirety of the staff complement within the respective departments, just those individuals that are involved to any extent in the processing of the applications. And so what that shows us is that there are about 3.7, just over 3.7 full-time equivalent positions that are consumed on an annual basis in the processing of planning applications, relative to a staff complement of about 20 individuals who touch the application at different stages. So looking beyond this top table or that baseline capacity utilization, we also wanted to make sure that we're looking at the anticipated volumes of development activity within the township over the next 5 to 10 years. So we looked at development forecasts identified in both the development charges background study as well as other growth forecast work that's been undertaken by the township and the county, to again look at what the staff utilization would look like at the increased volumes of activity that are expected over the next little while. And so with the table at the bottom, we're looking at what the forecast level of utilization of staff resources would look like. And relative to the baseline, we see that there would be an additional about 2.8 full-time equivalents that would be required to allow the township to get through that volume of applications, with the majority of that shortfall in full-time positions existing within the planning and development services group. When we look at the way that the staff resources there are utilized and specifically the level of involvement from the director as well as the senior planners, we see that there might be a need for a senior level position, such as a manager of planning, to again assist with that volume of work looking forward. And the full cost assessment that we have undertaken from this point forward takes into account those additional staff resources in the assessment of full costs and in recommending fee adjustments in light of those. The annual capacity utilization analysis was not undertaken for these services that are provided by the Infrastructure Services Group or the Community Services Group for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the activities there typically span more than one calendar year, so it's a little bit harder to pin that down to a single year. And the other aspect is that the volume of annual activity hasn't been tracked systematically, at least historically. So we are focused on the planning results in that regard. So then in terms of just touching on the different components of what is included in the full cost assessment. So again, we have the direct costs, which include the salary, wages, and benefits of the individuals who are directly involved in the processing of the applications that are undertaking these activities. And then we also have non-salary wage and benefit direct costs, which are typically materials and supplies that are consumed by staff in the provision of services. We then have the indirect costs, which I spoke about a little bit earlier, where again we're recognizing costs like human resources, IT, so those support function costs, which have been estimated to be about 25% of direct costs. That percentage allocation is informed by a review of many other municipal reviews that have been undertaken across the province, and that is also consistent with what was done through the building permit fees review. And then the final third component of the full cost definition are capital costs. So we are recognizing that in order for staff to provide services, there is reliance on capital assets, most notably the facility space, right, that's occupied by staff. And so there's a portion or a relative apportionment of the annual life cycle cost of facility space that's included in the full cost assessment as well. So then on the next slide here, we see the cost recovery results for the planning section or planning applications, where we see total annual costs of service. Again, this is a projection moving forward, so it is a little bit higher than what those costs have been historically. We are accounting for those additional staff positions. And that annual cost of service has been estimated at about $1.16 million. That's illustrated with the bar on the left. About 73%, so the vast majority of these costs are related to salary, wage, and benefit costs, those direct costs. Another 7% is that light blue portion, represents the other direct costs, such as materials and supplies. We then have the indirect costs, which is the orange portion of the bar. Those represent about 20% of total costs, and then a fairly small portion being the capital costs, or about 0.2% of the annual cost of service. Now, when we look at the revenues that would be expected to be generated by the fees that are currently in effect, we would expect those to generate about $433,000 in annual revenue. And so that would provide about 37% cost recovery relative to the costs of service. So there's again, a gap that we're looking to hopefully start narrowing or closing entirely with the fee recommendations. The other areas in terms of the infrastructure services and community services group, there's currently no cost recovery for those activities. So we'll get to the fee recommendations there shortly, but there is, again, no cost recovery currently. So then in terms of the recommendations in light of the costing results, firstly starting with the planning applications, the fee recommendations that have been put forward in the report sought to align the level of fees that is charged with cost recovery by fee category, because again, under the Planning Act, we are restricted to cost recovery by application type. We did recommend the introduction of a new fee for joint applications, joint official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications. Because it recognizes that there are some processing efficiencies when those applications are processed concurrently. So it's not just adding the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment fee. We also proposed to change the fee for draft plans of subdivision from what is currently a base fee plus a per unit fee to a flat fee, but also separated the agreement preparation fee as a separate fee in that regard. We also proposed the disaggregation or separation of fees for different types of condominiums, specifically the standard and common element, as well as vacant land condominiums. That just recognizes that there are different levels of effort required to process those, and so the fees were recommended accordingly. There's been an aggregation of the signed bylaw variance fees that has been proposed, a new lot grading and drainage plan approval and inspection fee that has been recommended for situations where there is no master drainage or master lot grading plan, so infill lots specifically. And then we also looked very closely at the fees charged for the pre-consultation process, where we also considered the changes to that process that might be made as a result of Bill 109 and what that requires municipalities to do, specifically around potentially having to issue refunds on planning applications if planning applications are not processed in a timely fashion. And so a lot more emphasis is being placed on that pre-consultation process by municipalities to ensure that the application that's ultimately submitted is of a good quality and will allow the municipality to process it in a timely fashion. So we looked at what that process is likely to look like moving forward, with it being likely a two-stage pre-consultation process, and provided fee recommendations or costing in light of those. So that summarizes the recommendations in terms of the planning application aspects. Next, when we look at the infrastructure services group, so these are again typically services that happen after a planning application has already been approved. So there is some involvement from the infrastructure services group in the review of the planning application, and that's covered under the planning application fees. But what we have proposed is to add new fees to recover the costs of work that's undertaken during the construction phase, because there's a lot of oversight, a lot of administration of the agreements themselves, and then physical on-site inspections of the infrastructure that take place as well. So we have proposed a number of new fees to recover the costs of that. And then last but not least, when we look at the community services group, again, mostly pertaining to the work undertaken during the construction phases, specifically related to parks development. We looked at the amount of effort that's typically spent on that in terms of consulting with the applicant, reviewing the parks plan, overseeing the construction, making sure it's up to township standards, and proposed a fee to see full cost recovery of those efforts as well. So with the proposed fees, just to revisit our graphic for the planning applications from previously, if the township was to recommend the fee recommendations as identified in the report, you would see about 99% cost recovery. It's not quite at 100% because through our initial discussions with staff, it was recognized that the minor zoning bylaw amendment applications, it wouldn't be desirable to necessarily charge a full cost fee there. And so, again, that would create about a 1%, would result the township to be about 1% below full cost recovery. In terms of next steps, we have just one item here, which is for council to consider adoption of new fees. There is a step that will need to come before this, and that is, my understanding is staff will be bringing forward specific fee recommendations, looking at also the market survey, and looking at that competitiveness aspect in a little bit more detail. And then once council considers the new fees, there are a couple of other things to consider on an annual basis. Those are ongoing adjustments of these fees and charges just to keep pace with inflationary pressures, which have been quite significant over the recent years especially, and then also ongoing monitoring of the performance of these fees and periodic updates to just make sure that the fees align with the process, because the processing of applications does change over time. The technology that's used in the process changes over time, and so it is important to update them from time to time comprehensively. And so that concludes the presentation. I would be happy to take any questions council might have.
Thank you, Peter, for that comprehensive overview. Yes, questions from council? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. The 2.8 positions, 2.80 positions, is that, what is the timeline on that they would be needed? Is that just for this year? Is this based on Wellington County's forecast up to 2051?
So that's when we look at the amount of development that has been forecasted for, I believe, the next 10 years specifically.
10?
So we are
Okay.
kind of averaging it over that period.
Yeah.
I think from conversations with staff, the pressure is already there in terms of an increasing trend in the volume of applications. But in terms of how quickly staff would be looking to secure the staff, I think I would defer to staff to comment on that.
Okay, and those are full-time permanent positions that you'd be recommending, or?
I think the staffing
Again-
could look different, it could be undertaken different ways. It could be multiple
Contract.
part-time positions or contract positions. So
Okay.
there's just a need for full-time, 2.8 full-time equivalents, however that is ultimately staffed.
Okay, and if I may, I just have one more question. I'm happy to see fees added for parks, because usually development fees do include a portion for parks, and I think it would help our citizens when they're fundraising for parks as well, to see the township and some of their efforts being put into it through taxes and development fees, really. I think when we're designing our plans, a park seems to always be included, but it's sort of left to the community to follow through with that. So I definitely am happy to see that portion. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Peter. We have a recommendation that the council of the Township of Centre Wellington accept the planning and development fee study completed by Watson and Associate Economists Limited, and that council authorize township staff to prepare an amendment to the fees and changes bylaw. So do I have a mover on that? Mover Welton, yes. Mover Evoy, yes. All those in favor? So moved. Thank you. Okay, item 8.3, Elora Meadows Neighbourhood Multi-Use Pad Project. 8.2. Oh, sorry. Right. 8.2. Community Lands Need Review, report by Brett Salmon, Managing Director of Planning and Development.
Thank you again, Mayor Waters. I think the best approach for this presentation is to have the county staff make their presentation on the land needs assessment process and sort of where we've landed today, and then I'll deliver my report requesting approval for us to retain Watson to help us kind of with the next stage. So Jameson is here from the county. And Sarah.
Sarah. Sorry, Sarah, I didn't want to make you come all drive up here and not have to do a report or anything, but
Oh, no.
no, I appreciate it anyways.
No, I'm happy to be here.
Okay.
Aldo Salas would have joined us, but he's a little under the weather, so here we are. So Mayor Waters and members of council, I'm happy to be here this evening to talk about growth. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm the manager of policy planning at the county. And I'll just get myself oriented. Is the present? Oh, okay. I'll slow down. I wouldn't do a very good job at that one. That looks familiar. Awesome, okay. So the presentation is meant to give you all the information I hope that you need to know to bring you up to speed with where we are with the land needs assessment, and also where we'll be going from there. So the contents provide you that general overview, and basically I'll be walking through the municipal comprehensive review that has been underway for a number of years at the county. Need to always start these conversations with the province, because the province is there's a top-down approach to planning in Ontario. Quite simply put, the province does set the ground rules, how much our communities grow, where the growth will occur, how to calculate need for additional land, and ultimately what is approved, as they have the final say in the approval. And the province sets many of those parameters through their policies and plans. Did want to start with the map for the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, just to give you a sense of where we're positioned in the outer ring it's referred to. Of course, the growth plan sets that growth management framework for us. And then there's also the inner ring, which includes the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. Just showing this information because it's important to understand the growth that's coming to us in that general area. So in 2020, a number of changes came through to that growth plan, including extending the planning horizon for an additional 10 years, a major fundamental change in considering growth as a minimum rather, as a minimum rather than a maximum. So it's a floor rather than a ceiling. And there's an increased share of growth that was assigned to those outer ring municipalities shown in that map. And also an increased share to Wellington County within the outer ring. So what that looks like is, as this graphic shows, a 1.5% annual growth rate for Wellington County from 2016 to 2051. What's important to know about that stat is that, so there's a 2% increase in Wellington County's allocation, which might not sound like a lot, but what that's done is our previous rate of growth was 0.7, and we were placed 9th out of 15 municipalities in the outer ring, and now we're number 3. And also the outer ring will be the fastest growing area in Ontario. So how do we manage that growth to 2051? The main tool is through that municipal comprehensive review that is set out by the province. And that's basically a process that we're required to follow to update the official plan with key parts of the growth plan. And we've got a list here of some of the major components, but really 3 key areas: the forecasts, the targets, and the land need. And you may have seen this graphic before. It's just a way to illustrate the fact that we're doing an official plan review. We're focusing on that MCR right now. There are a lot of areas that we'll be looking at. The conversation tonight is mainly about growth management, but all of the areas that are identified there are important and have a number of topics beneath them that we'll also be dealing with. And I think if I were to review all of the comments that we've had over the course of all of the public consultations we've done, we've hit every focus area for sure. So let's continue on with the county work plan. We've got 3 key phases of the technical work related to the growth management piece. So we have the urban structure and growth analysis as phase 1. That work is largely complete. Phase 2 is that land needs assessment. And phase 3 is settlement area boundary reviews. And we're continuing to implement phase 1 through official plan amendments that are ongoing. Okay, and then into the results for Centre Wellington, starting with population and housing. We had a good question at our open house for official plan amendment 120. Which is our growth forecast amendment, and that was, what essentially what influences population growth and why so much for Centre Wellington. And really the technical answer is what we have here: the demographics, economics, and socioeconomics, which is a real summary of what Watson actually did for us. These factors impact the rate and magnitude of growth. But they also influence the form and the density and location of residential and non-residential development. But also for Centre Wellington, of course, it's a very attractive place to work and live. As I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the picture, and just to have a group of 7 piece of art of your community is really something. So in terms of where that population growth is coming from, a lot of it is expected to come from people moving from other urban centers east of the county. And just touching on those actual technical reviews, so the Phase 1 technical review was completed and in early 2022, and that sets out the population, housing, and employment forecasts, and also allocates them by municipality and by urban center. That report has been approved in principle by County Council, and as I've said, we have official plan amendments in progress. And we have been using a staff technical resource team, and that's made up of municipal CAOs and planning staff. And we've been meeting and reviewing the technical work. Of course, we've also been engaging with members of the public, and we've done agency circulations as well as we've been cycling through all of this work. But I did want to give you a bit of the backstory about how that played out. We did make changes to the forecast to reduce the Centre Wellington population and household numbers. Some of those changes happened before they even got to the public posting stage. So I thought I would give you some of that data. Once it was released to the public, we made another minor reduction in Centre Wellington. But overall, we did direct a larger share of growth to our northern municipalities and, of course, to Erin because they have new wastewater treatment coming. So without those changes, the land needs results for Centre Wellington would have been higher. So the population growth forecast is set out in these tables. If you're noticing, you've seen some different numbers. Some of the data we've released is from 2021 to 2051, and others are 2016 to 2051. I tried to stay true to the technical report in case you were comparing. But as the results show, Centre Wellington is forecast to take a 44% share of the county's growth, which is consistent with historic trends. So that's growth to just over 58,000 people in 2051. And then the growth forecast typically is in line with, of course, the population forecast. That's an additional over 1,200 housing units over that 35-year period. Annual units will increase significantly from that historical rate of 174 units per year to 322. Employment results also showing a significant amount of the county's employment growth is being allocated to Centre Wellington, 48%, to make sure that we balance employment growth with housing growth. And I think that's all I had to say about that. Moving into the land needs assessment methodology. So there is a method that we're required to follow. There's a document there. But just to give a quick overview of what the land needs assessment process is all about is it's basically a process that translates population and employment growth into an area of land needed to accommodate such growth. The province decides that methodology, and they've published a new methodology in 2020. And there are two baskets or buckets of land that is assessed for need. One is for employment, and then the other one is basically for everything else, and it's referred to as community areas. And so what are community areas? A lot of it is housing, but it also includes jobs, so population-related jobs that support your urban employment base, so things like commercial, office, and institutional. Wanted to just illustrate that using your official plan as an example, showing the land use schedule for Elora Salem and just pointing out where those land use designations are and how they correspond. Maybe more simply put is everything except the dark green core greenlands and the blue is your community area. And so that also includes your downtown and other mixed use and transitional areas. And then employment areas are the traditional industrial type buildings that you would see in your industrial designation. And it also, not to get into the weeds too much, it includes some office jobs and other jobs that would help serve your employment areas. And back to the official plan schedule, it's the areas identified in blue. And then coming to the results of the land needs assessment, maybe there, okay, I'm not pressing hard enough. So the phase 2 technical review, very similar process to the, sorry, I'll just keep talking. So the phase 2 review was finished in August of 2022. It looked at the intensification and greenfield density targets. Those are what I would refer to as 2 policy levers that we have that impacts the amount of land need and conversely how much agricultural land is consumed. The phase 2 report has also been approved in principle by County Council. And hoping to make this a bit easier by actually showing the greenfield in green. So it's not so counterintuitive. We show it as purple in the official plan. So the built up area is the area shown in gray. Those are the areas in your communities that are already essentially built up. And that's the area where the intensification target is measured. The analysis of intensification completed by Watson and Associates estimates how many units can be directed to those areas. Center Wellington is forecast a minimum of 20% an intensification rate. The county-wide forecast is 15%. It's worth noting that there were constraints to intensification in Wellington, and that's why we have been considering the alternative intensification target, the reduction to 15%. That relates to cultural heritage resources in your community, flood-prone areas in some of our northern municipalities. There's limited planned wastewater capacity for intensification in Erin. There's some of our built-up areas are quite small in Drayton and Moorfield. Rockwood is coming to the end of its servicing capacity that it gets from the city of Guelph. And also we're measuring intensification across 12 separate urban centers, some of which have a limited supply of vacant designated lands. And then last but not least, there's no intensification measured for the township of Puslinch because Aberfoyle and Morriston don't have a built boundary or a built-up area. And moving to Greenfield, the Greenfield areas with that density target, those are the lands outside of your built-up area, but still within your established urban boundaries. And so, shown in green, the forecast target for Center Wellington through the technical work is 47 people and jobs per hectare. So that exceeds the current recommended recommended target in the growth plan, and also that's the county-wide forecast and the forecast or the density target in the current official plan. All right. Whoops. And Watson was good enough to provide a greenfield density example with your community in it. So I find this is helpful because it gets a little bit hard to when you're speaking about these density numbers to know exactly what that looks like. So this is an example of 42 people and jobs per hectare at Tower Street and McQueen Boulevard. And what that looks like here is about 40% apartments and almost 30% of towns and single detached dwellings. Okay, and then we're at the results of the land needs assessment. Before I step into that, I've got the two notes here on the slide. One, that the Phase 2 technical work also was adjusted and resulted in a reduction of about 200 acres of overall land need for Centre Wellington. So that was essentially due to an increase in the greenfield density from 44 to 47. And then I wanted to also clarify that community area, again, as I said, is not only housing. And so we have a few of the things listed here that would also be included, and that actually accounts for 44% of the community area, and then the remainder would be housing. And so in terms of the actual number, after all of that technical work, hundreds and hundreds of pages, we have an urban community area land need of 238 hectares, or almost 600 acres, and then the employment area need is 160 hectares, or just about 400 acres, so about 1,000 acres combined. Okay, and then into our next steps, Phase 3, so back to that early graphic that we had, we're looking at, we've started the Phase 3 work for the settlement area boundary review. And to get into that in a little more detail, I'm calling them stages so that we don't have phases within phases, but we do have phases within phases because Phase 3 is being split into two. Phase 3A is urban, 3B is rural. And I think there's a good reason to do that because we have lots to talk about in both areas. So you can see here for stage 1, we have a policy review, which is very important and critical to do a full policy review with all of those topic areas that we had highlighted. But the Bill 3 changes have also touched on our overarching framework, our land use policy framework. The province is considering a combination of the provincial policy statement and a place to grow. So they put that out for, they consulted on 5 core elements with subcategories. There's no draft policy document available yet at this time. So it makes sense to put a bit of a pause on policy development. We're constantly monitoring. Jameson monitors every day on the ERO to see what's happening, especially on Fridays, I now know. That seems to be a good day. So what we're doing, I'm just going to go back to this graphic, is we're going to be moving forward with that stage 2 work, which should dovetail nicely with the work that you're considering here today. Because we have lands within urban areas that need to be considered. There are future development lands designated in a number of our northern municipalities, and those lands don't have a land use assigned to them yet. So we know from our land need that almost all of those lands need to be brought into the development pipeline, except for about 90 hectares in Wellington North. So that will take us some time to do the work to do that. We also want to look at a mixed-use commercial residential designation, and there will probably be some other areas that'll come up along the way. So that seems to be a good place to start for us. And sorry, then stage 3 is where things will come into play that would be more of interest to Centre Wellington, where we would be looking at the need for settlement area boundary expansion and how to evaluate and what kind of criteria we would use to look at those types of requests. All right, so the key takeaway is that there is time for the township to review the land needs assessment findings and look at scenarios. And, you know, Brett and I work fairly closely together, and we want to make sure that, we can accommodate your time frame, and it doesn't look like it's going to hold up anything else, so that's kind of a win-win. Of course, Centre Wellington carries a significant share of the county's growth, so any changes that are made to the township's intensification percentage have more of an impact on overcoming that 5% reduction. More important than that, any increase in either target uses land more efficiently and would reduce that agricultural land consumption. There is support in the Phase 2 report for updating the results as well to account for the greenfield density in the South Fergus secondary plan area, which I understand hasn't really been vetted to council yet, so the timing didn't quite work out with our technical work. So that was already a point that was contained in our work. So that brings the presentation to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Council, questions for Sarah? Yes.
I attended one of the public meetings. It's me. I
That
was
was
the
your
problem.
question. No, it was a good question. And I got to answer it better now.
You did very well.
Okay, good.
I asked, why is Centre Wellington always the most growth? And I look at, the other townships in Wellington County. And so you did reduce that. I see that you reduced that, and I appreciate it. It's nice to see Aaron, and it would be nice to be able to see Puslich actually put a stamp on more. So, I get it, we have to grow, but if I have another constituent call me and say, where's the daycare? It's fine that they want to come here and live. Love that. We love our town. I certainly do. But we're not there yet with providing. Right now, it's a 3-year wait for daycares. And as much as I'm working with county to try and move that along, myself as a counselor, I can't speak for the others, but I have to give them some sort of answer. And so we had a lot of movement during COVID in housing, and now they're calling on me, where's the daycare, Lisa? I have to go back to the office. So it's great that people want to come live here and work here, but we also have to provide services to be a whole community. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. As you know, I've been following this along fairly closely. So I'm just curious along the process, was it not possible within the provincial methodology to separate out the townships and the different urban centers throughout the county? So Centre Wellington could have had scenarios run that were at a higher intensification rate while keeping the other ones in Wellington North and Erin and Puslinch low? Or was the methodology so that it had to be a blanket?
No, in fact, that is what was done.
Okay.
So two municipalities, Wellington North and Centre Wellington, have 20%.
Okay.
Erin is 7%, and then it goes up to 15%. So there's a big range, and that's the same with the greenfield density target as well. They go from 32 up to 47.
Right.
Yeah.
Follow-up? Would it be possible, did Watson ever run scenarios with higher intensification rates for Centre Wellington, Wellington North then? Or was 20 what worked out?
Well, 20 is what they felt was reasonable. There's an art and a science to this. It's difficult to anticipate. It's a bit easier if you have vacant designated land to see and project what a developer might do, but it's hard to know, what land assembly and redevelopment might take place. And I think it sounds like that's something that might be able to be looked at a little more closely. And, this process has been a multi-year process. Our supply inventory is from July of 2019, and we know that things have changed, and certainly Watson they did factor in the pandemic, and they did estimates of additional residential units, and that's why we're constantly, every month we get building permit data from all of our building departments, and We know that, you know, things will constantly be changing. This is a snapshot in time with our best efforts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? One more? Okay, yep, go ahead.
In the example you provided of the density targets, where it had the apartment, the townhouses, and the single-family homes, could you tell me how tall that apartment building was? Was that a 2-story, 3-story?
I think it was 4.
4?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Okay, any other comments, questions from council? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Sarah.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. We have a recommendation that council, the Township of Centre Wellington, authorize staff to retain Watson and Associates. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Disappointed that Lisa interrupted you. Yeah, anyways, so my report really is building on the county's presentation, and you know, there are if council wanted to perhaps mitigate the amount of land that we need for urban expansion, then our options are to either intensify more or have higher density on the green fields, or some combination of both. So in speaking with the county staff and where they're at, and the CAO and I are thinking that we would like to put forward that the township retain Watson to do a further analysis to come up with those kind of scenarios that might mitigate the amount of land that we need to expand the urban boundary by. 1,000 acres sounds like a lot. All of the land, I think, surrounding all of the urban areas in the county is prime agricultural land. So expanding the urban boundary will always come at the expense of prime agricultural land. So if we want to mitigate that, our options are to increase the density either by more intensification, as I say, or by the greenfield density target. So we have a window of opportunity, given that the county are just getting started on their phase 3, that we can use Watson to run some different scenarios. We have, council will soon see the next phase of the South Fergus secondary plan and the density that's envisioned there. And, you know, we do have quite a few intensification proposals before us. And we can do a little bit more of an update of the numbers of intensification that we've seen. More recently, since the target's been established, that sort of 20% to 25% is about where we've been historically. So, and I'm told that 30% would have been what Centre Wellington would need to achieve in order for the county to have stayed at the current target of 20%. So, you know, that's a number that I think there's merit in looking at as well. So, again, we have a quotation from Watson of about 32,800, and the CEO assures me that that's a growth-related cost that can be paid for out of development charges. So there's no tax dollars needed to do that. We've discussed again the Watson are not being retained by the county as part of their phase 3, so we can hire Watson without a conflict with the work that the county's doing. So we think, but there is a need to get on it and get started right away, because the county's already started with their phase 3 work.
Thank you, Brett. There was a comment or a question from Councillor Efoy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I am very excited about the opportunity to hire them to look at options for us, but I respectfully and genuinely, from a place of not knowing, ask, will they listen? Like, are they obligated to, they meaning the county, to acknowledge or to make potential changes if we in fact find something that could serve the township better?
I think Sarah made the point about the county collaborating with municipalities, and I think Mayor Waters could say that based on his track record of working with the county, is the county works very hard to get along with the local municipalities, and they really respect the local input. I have to say, at the end of the day, we do you know, we're answerable to the province. The county's answerable to the province. And there is, there's always the possibility that the province can overturn, even if the county agrees with us and they look and use less land, the province can step in and say, you're not providing enough land to meet the housing supply need. And they can overturn the county's decision. And they've done that recently with some municipalities in their official plan approvals.
Thank you. Just trying to understand the process a little better. Thank you.
Yes.
Through you, Mayor Waters. Just a question about, you made a comment that there will be more information coming on the South Fergus secondary plan and its status. Will that also include information on the status of other greenfield locations? That was my question. And then just kind of a comment on that. As the representative of Ward 4, which my assumption is currently Centre Wellington's largest ward and already has by population and density, I think, you know, growth is affecting all of us here in Centre Wellington, and I don't think it's going to be solved just by, you know, intensification in one particular ward. So I'm just kind of curious on the status of that South Fergus secondary plan and an update on, there was other greenfield locations there on the map.
Right. In terms of the South Fergus secondary plan, if you went to our Connect CW site, you can find the information that exists today. I just know that the consultants are about to submit sort of the next phase of the work pretty soon. So that's where the more detailed and the policies and all that will come forward to council. There's been public consultation up till now, and there'll be another one. So that work is coming soon. The map that you saw the county put up in their presentation that shows the different greenfield areas is one of the dilemmas or the challenges that we have is the built boundary that establishes sort of the difference between the intensification area or the built up area and the greenfield was set in 2006 and it hasn't changed. So a lot of those areas that are on the greenfield map that the county showed will already have a plan on it. And so they're not new land that we could raise the density on. The largest block of new greenfield lands happens to be the South Fergus. You know, for example, Storybrook in the Northwest Fergus area has a draft plan on the entire thing, and about 50% of it is developed already. Some of the lands on the east side of Fergus, that subdivision's built out. So there's very few of those parcels in Fergus that aren't already built on since.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Brett. Just wondering about, with the study with Watson, is it possible to put in a stipulation that we want to run at least one scenario at the 30% intensification and a 55 density jobs and people per acre density target?
Yeah, county can direct, or council can direct that be the case. I don't see a problem with that. That's the kind of density that Dan and I have spoken about in creating the report. So, I mean, I envision, I think my report speaks to that, of course, one scenario is the county scenario, which is 47, as Sarah mentioned, and 20% intensification. So we can include the 30% I said I think is important, and 55 would be a little bit of an increase. And then I've been trying to think about what would be kind of either I could either call it the worst case or the best case scenario, depending on your perspective. But you know, the provincial government, previous provincial government, when they updated the growth plan in 2017, they were talking about 50% intensification and doubling that greenfield target of 40 people on jobs per hectare to 80. And at the time, Centre Wellington Council, we wrote to the minister and said, that's impossible. So I think that's an impossible scenario, so I wouldn't want to go that high, to be honest. But
Any other comments or, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Just also one question in terms of the concerns brought up by the delegation earlier, Mr. Rankin. Can you tell me traditionally what the avenues for public involvement would be in this process? There was mention of involving some community groups working with Watson there. I don't know if you could just speak to some of those.
Well, our intention was that Watson would be creating the different scenarios, and that's the confined extent of what we'd be retaining to do. But our thought was the county and the township working together once those scenarios would be built through the phases. There would need to be public consultation, and that the county and the township would work together on that.
Yes, Councillor.
Through you, Mr. Reese, sorry, for further clarification to Councillor Adams' point, does that mean we would look to groups like agriculture and other groups that were mentioned? Because I think it would be prudent, if we're going to move forward with that, to make sure that it's part of our plan to reach out to some of our stakeholders and community groups there within.
Yeah, and I think through groups like the Federation of Agriculture, the county already does that regularly. And we have, we're not sitting as Economic Development Task Force now, right at the moment, but we do have agricultural input that way as well.
Any other comments or questions from council? Okay. Okay, we have a recommendation. I'm assuming we have a recommendation here. We have a recommendation that Council of the Township of Central Wellington authorize staff to retain Watson and Associates economists to prepare a community land needs assessment as per staff report PLN 2023-06 dated January 30th, 2023. Do I have a mover for that? Mover by Mr. Craddock, or sorry, Councillor Craddock. Seconder, Councillor Adams. All those in favor? Oh, sorry.
So I would just like to make an amendment that at least one scenario that Watson runs would be at the 30% intensification and 55 jobs and people per acre. Acre or hectare?
Yep. And so is that, obviously staff picked that up. I was going to ask you about that anyways, about that, but is that okay for, so do we need a point of, or just take that in, or how do we do that?
You can pass an amendment, so it would say, and that this scenario
Okay.
be included.
Okay. And this scenario would be included. We had a mover, we had a seconder, and then all in favor on that? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Okay, now we finally get to 8.3. I know you've been all waiting out there. So, okay. Elora Meadows Neighbourhood multi-use pad project, and a report from Matt Tucker. Thank you, Matt.
Good evening. Through you, Mayor Waters, Warren and Amy from the Elora Meadows neighborhood had shared with council their goal to build an outdoor multi-use pad. Just on the screen, it sort of gives you an idea on the picture on the inset where the park is in Elora. It's between Elora and Salem, and similar to what they've shown everyone earlier, the rough placement of that pad. So the Elora, in order for this to happen, the Elora Meadows Association would like a letter of support from the township. A letter of support from the township would just allow the association to apply for grants, and also just look for receiving corporate donations as well. So that's they're looking for that support. And once the funding is in place, again, they're an eager neighborhood, really great to work with, and just an amazing group of people that are eager to help their neighborhood. So once the funding is in place, staff will prepare an agreement for council's consideration between the township and the association, sort of outlining the scope of the project, the design, the assumptions, approvals, construction, budget and funding, and the timeline. So I know they're eager, and I'm hoping this will fly through with no issues. So I'll open the floor up to questions.
Comments or questions? Yes.
Through you, Mayor Waters. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Once the park is up and done, they've fundraised, we have an agreement between the township and the park, then the township eventually takes that over, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Yes.
Through you, Mayor, just a quick comment. Through my experience on CSAC, I became very familiar with this group, and I think it's a great collaboration with the town and a residents group, and I fully support it, and I think it's great, and I think hopefully we see more kind of collaborative projects like this coming in the future.
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
Just a comment, I think this project is wonderful and everything, so that's great. But I'm just curious from a township perspective, how we make sure the distribution of facilities like this is equitable to all of our neighborhoods. So how do we make sure that we have a similar kind of structure and opportunities with neighborhoods that maybe have a little more challenges in these fundraising opportunities? And nothing against this particular project, just, yeah, thanks.
Pat, would you like to answer that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try. Thank you for the question. So we have a park development standard that provides us direction as to what goes into each park. We also have our master plan, which has other facilities that we put in community parks, regional parks, neighborhood parks, to make sure that they're equally distributed for access. So this is a standard to build this pad at this park that exceeds what we would consider our standard build out. And so that is why the group has fundraised and come to us with their proposal for something that exceeds what we put into a neighborhood park. Typically, if you think of a pad like this, it would be somewhere that we would consider a community or regional park. Bissell Park is an example where people can drive to, there's parking, there's lots of amenities as well with it. So this exceeds that, so this is an exception, and so that's why they're fundraising it, and that's why they're coming here for that letter of support. So I'm not sure if I can tell you how we'll make sure this gets repeated, but I think if other groups have this kind of initiative or want to see this happen, they should come and speak to our department, and then we can see how we can collaborate, what funding is available, what isn't, and all of those kinds of things start with a conversation, which is what we started with this group.
Thank you. Councillor Craddock.
Thanks, Mr. Tucker. This just ties into like our amendment to the charges and fees in this project as well. Do we have the ability to waive those fees for community-minded projects? Any developing costs that like they may incur that the township would charge?
So I'm not sure there would be a development charge for this project. There might be a building permit if they require any type of retaining wall. But maybe I can come back to you with that answer once we get further into the details. I think that's a great question. We're in a concept planning stage. We haven't looked at the topography and the details of the build out yet. So that will come in the agreement, and perhaps that would be a spot where council could comment on fees like that.
But historically, like community-minded projects, do we do that? Have we done that in the past where we've waived any township fees that we would impose?
So waiving of fees is absolutely at the discretion of council and not a staff level decision. So anything like that would come as a request to council, and it might have a report attached to it, depending what the fee is and what the request is. So just to explain that a little further, when you see the grant policy that's coming, you'll see that we have an opportunity there for people to come through that process to ask for waiving of fees for recreation facilities if it was a fundraiser. We ask that council consider that the cost of that then has to still be recovered by that department who has a revenue number to reach. So typically council finds another place within the budget to make sure that Parks and Recs, for example, would receive the fee for using the hall, or that planning or building would definitely receive that fee because they're not a, I don't know how to explain, they're separate from the other fees we collect. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments, questions from council? Yes, go ahead.
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, just a quick comment. I'm sure that we will be pushing this out really loudly so that all the communities have an opportunity to get as engaged as this wonderful community is. And I think that's one of the things that we as a council agree on, that we want to be as front-facing and engage our community as much and as often and in as many places as we can. So hopefully this will be a great example of that.
Okay, it looks like, I think we're done on that. Anyways, thank you, Matt. Okay, we have a recommendation that council, the Township of Centre Wellington supports the concept plan for an outdoor multi-use pad project presented by Elora Meadows Association for Elora Meadows Park, and council authorized the mayor to prepare and sign a letter of support for this project, and that council directs staff to prepare an agreement for a council's consideration between Elora Meadows Association and the Township of Centre Wellington, outlining the scope of the project, details for the design, assumptions, approvals, construction, budget, and funding, and timelines. Do I have a mover for that? Yes. Councillor Wilton. Councillor McDonald, seconder. All those in favor? Okay. Well, that's exciting. So, Orrin and Amy, we'll be watching with interest. Thank you for all your work to this point. Yeah, yeah, okay. I think we're going to just take a little, a 7-minute break. Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome back, folks. We'll get back to the action here on Council Central. So, anyways, you got to have a little humor. So, okay, so we have item 8.4, animal control contract extension. This is this usually a course of normal business. So we have a recommendation that Council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorize the Mayor and Municipal Clerk to execute an extension agreement between the Corporation of the Township of Centre Wellington and the Partnership of the Township of Guelph-Aramasa and the Guelph Humane Society for animal control and shelter service until June 30th, 2023. So do I have a mover for that? Mover, yes, Councillor Wilton. Seconder, Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? Thank you. Item 8.5, Victoria Park Senior Centre. Sorry? I just sneezed. Oh. Excuse you. Okay. And bless you. Victoria Park Senior Centre 2023 Advisory Board. Again, a bit of housekeeping here. A recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington confirm the appointment of the following members to the Victoria Park Senior Centre Advisory Board. Don Barfoot, Joan Berry, Darlene Isabel Kennedy, Claire Penrose, Mavis Vett, and Donna Waynar? Okay, thank you for that correction. Anyways, we have a recommendation. We have a mover on that. Councillor Craddock, mover, seconder. Councillor Evoy, all those in favor? So moved. Item 8.6, appointment to the Fergus and Elora Business Improvement Area Boards of Management. Recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington confirm appointment of the following members to the Board of Management for the Fergus Business Improvement Area. That's Tala Jenkins, Chair, Bonnie Shorttill, Vice Chair, Joyce Reimer, Treasurer, Natalie McNeil, Charlene Sticken, Deb Greer, and Miranda Holmes. Do we have a mover for that? Oh, sorry. And, oh, yes. And that that Council confirm the appointment of the following members to the Board of Management for the Elora Business Improvement Area. McLean Han, Chair, Sabine Mars, Vice Chair, Fior Guido, Treasurer, Sarah Simona, Kathy Bastian, Deb Croft, Kathy Deltry, and Kathy Sullivan. And then the Mayor and the Clerk execute a bylaw to reflect the new executive of the Board of Management for the Fergus and Elora Business Improvement Area pursuant to S2 2042 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended. Again, do I have a mover for that? Yes. Councillor Evoy, seconder on that. Councillor McDonald, all those in favor? So moved. And another item here as part of our just general things that happen here at times. Item 8.7, Bailey Drainage Works A and C, Drains, Maintenance and Repair 2022. Recommendation that Council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorize the Mayor, Municipal Clerk to execute a bylaw to provide the maintenance and repair of Bailey Drainage Works A and C drains at the top end of A drain in W Part Lot 25 and necessary portions of C drain concession 6 as recommended by the Drainage Superintendent and for the boring on the credit of the municipality for the amount required for such work. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Wilton. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? So moved. And then Snow Drainage Works Maintenance and Repair 2022. Recommendation that Council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorize the Mayor and Municipal Clerk to execute a bylaw to provide the maintenance and repair of snow drainage works at the top end of drain through concession 2 as recommended by Drainage Superintendent and for the boring on the credit of the municipality for the amount required for such work. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Adams. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Craddock. All those in favor? So moved. And okay. Item 8.9, partial demolition at listed property, 244 Melville Street, Elora. And Mary Ann, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Waters, members of council. So the report before you is regarding a partial demolition at 244 Melville Street in Elora. It is partial because it is only the tower that stands at the front of the building. It's a residential dwelling. And there is also a small rear addition that is proposed to be removed. So the property is on the Municipal Heritage Register as a non-designated property, which we often call a listed property. And what that means is basically the property owner must provide council 60 days notice of an intent to demolish. And within that time, that allows staff and the Heritage Committee to take a look at it and make a recommendation as to whether it should be permitted to proceed through demolition or it should be halted through designation. So just for clarity, the only way to stop partial demolition or a full demolition is to protect the property through heritage designation. So there are photos and there's information attached to the report which were provided by the owner, and essentially the property, the structure, it's a residential dwelling, was constructed around 1908 and constructed by Norman Stafford. There's some heritage value to the property, but the integrity of those portions of the structure have been compromised. So there is a structural engineer's report attached that goes into a lot of detail about the poor condition, the lack of a proper foundation for the tower structure, the lack of insulation, and significant structural concerns. So essentially the tower is pulling away from the structure. It was constructed at a later time. So also the rear addition is in poor condition, and they intend to replace it with a new addition of a larger size and an attached garage. So Heritage Center Wellington was consulted in November 15th, 2022, and does not have any concerns or objections to the demolition request. As such, staff recommends that the demolition be permitted to proceed, and also that the property remain on the Municipal Heritage Register due to its cultural heritage value of the main dwelling, to provide an interim protection from any future demolition. And I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Waters. So is this demolition and add-on the same square footage, or are we increasing the square footage? I can't tell.
Through you, the demolition of the tower, the replacement is going to be the same size, so the same exact footprint. What's going to happen with the towers, they're rebuilding, instead of the concrete patterned block that's there now, would be brick to match the dwelling, and also would have, right now it's a flat roof, so it would actually have a pitched roof, so to help with the water issues. And then the second part is the addition at the back would be larger. The new addition with the garage attached would be larger than what's there now.
Okay.
It's
So
sort of at
it
the
will
back
be
and
larger.
side.
Okay.
Yes.
It is lovely, I have to say. I mean, they've definitely put a lot of thought into it. Look forward to walking past on my walks and seeing it progress. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mary Ann. A recommendation that Council of Township of Centre Wellington approves partial demolition request for tower structure and rear addition at the listed property known as 244 Melville Street, Elora, in the Township of Centre Wellington, and that the property remains on the Municipal Heritage Register as a non-designated listed property. Do we have a mover for that? Councillor Ivor, a seconder. Councillor McDonald, all those in favor? So moved. Okay, we'll see you in a few minutes. So we're moving on to, I'll just wait to Councillor Wilton drop. Yes, okay. Thank you. So item 8.10, Heritage Permit 27-43 West Mill Street, Elora. A report from Mary Ann. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you again, through you, Mayor Waters. So this is slightly different. It's a heritage permit, and that is because it is a designated protected heritage property on the municipal register. So as such, any alterations that might impact the heritage attributes of the property require a heritage permit process. And we received a heritage permit application in mid-December. So the property is known as the former commercial hotel, or Bigger's commercial hotel. And there have been several additions to the property. The focus of this heritage permit is the front portion. So it's the what is a stone building underneath, and it's the one that's facing the street right now, and it's the former hotel. So the extent or scope of the permit application for this phase of the project is, and I'll just briefly summarize, exposure of the original stone exterior, reinstating the original window openings and inserting new window and door openings, reinstating the original roof line to the higher pitch, and new roof cladding, removal of the rear lean-to addition, and construction of a new rear stairwell addition in its place. And then interior renovations to establish 2 commercial units on the ground floor and 2 residential units on each of the second and third floors. Staff requested a heritage impact assessment be prepared and submitted with the application, and that was just in order to determine that no negative impacts would result, and or that mitigation measures would be proposed, and that all the work is undertaken in accordance with Canada's standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places, which is the generally accepted Canada-wide document that is used when reviewing such applications. So, as the property is designated, Council has 3 options, and the decision is to be made within 90 days of receipt. That is basically what the Ontario Heritage Act requires. So you could either consent to an application, consent to it with terms and conditions, or refuse the application. So as required as well through the Ontario Heritage Act, the Heritage Committee was consulted on this application at its meeting on January 10th. And after some discussion, they were fine with the methodology and conclusions made and have no concerns. So there was one minor issue that I should raise, and that is that we requested that additional elevation be submitted for some enhancement of the storefront facades at the lower level. And several conditions were proposed. So there's 6 conditions, which I can briefly go through. And I also forgot to mention that I have Jason Martin here as well, architect with Martin Simmons Swears, and they worked on the project, so he is also here to answer any questions. But I'll just briefly go through the conditions that are proposed. That a designation plaque be installed, that draft to the update to the draft designation bylaw be provided, that a commemoration strategy be provided to help inform the public about the history of the building. And then again, that the additional fenestration details be provided, but those don't need to come back to council. They could just be approved at the Heritage Committee level if council approves that. And then a record of alterations to be kept on site, and that all the work is done in accordance with the standards and guidelines. So conservation measures have been recommended in the HIA, and those would be also instituted while the work proceeds. So in conclusion, staff is recommending approval of the heritage permit application with the 6 conditions outlined, and a designation bylaw will be updated and provided back to council once the work is complete on the property. So I can answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Comments? Go ahead. Yes?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I am so excited about this project. I think it is well overdue, and I think that those putting it together deserve our appreciation. I think it's a great project, and I'm looking forward to seeing it unfold.
Any other? Yes, go ahead.
Through Mayor Waters. So this is currently a designated heritage property, incomplete. And we're going to leave it to the Heritage Committee to follow through on some of the other minor things? Is that like the plaque and, you know, is that, just if you could educate me a little bit, is that a requirement that they would have to do that?
Yes, through you, there are conditions to ensure that other work is carried out after the project is complete.
Okay.
So it's just so that the owner is aware that these are the things that we would be looking for, and we're putting them on the record through the approval.
Okay, fair enough. It's a beautiful building, and we've had no complaints from neighbors or anything. I don't see any in the folder.
On this application?
Yeah.
No, nothing.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor. Actually, just a clarification, not quite on this topic. I'm glad that Heritage Center Wellington was able to advise. So just clarification of the 4 advisory committees, it's just Heritage Center Wellington, right? That is still active and meeting, like the other 3 meeting, the ones are, okay, until like new members are appointed. Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from council? I have a couple of questions. Thank you for that. Again, thank you for that presentation. And maybe this question directed towards the architect. I noticed on the old historic condition, the porch. You know, obviously that porch is sort of iconic to that building, A.J. Casson. There was a painting with that porch there. Was there any discussion on sort of the ability to maybe retain that porch, or with the, so who might, is this to ask the architect that way, or to ask Mariana
I
that way?
could answer
Okay.
that question,
Yep.
yes, through you. Yes, there was discussion about that because the intent was to restore. So when you do that, you take photographic evidence and you try to, you know, replicate or repair those features that are either missing or in need of repair. And that was identified early on as sort of a wish, like it would be ideal that would be restored, and that was expressed by several committee members, and also I think the owner was initially looking at that. But that, when we started to explore that, there were a lot of issues that arose in terms of infrastructure, from infrastructure services. I'm not sure if there are services actually in that road allowance there in front of the building, but just to clarify, the building itself, the face of the building is the property line. So there is no room to do anything in front of that wouldn't encroach on the townships right away. So for issues with regards to servicing services that might be there, snow storage, snow clearing activities, it was, and then there were, also building code issues. So there was a discussion, and I was reminded today about discussions with the chief building official in terms of issuing permits in future, and he indicated that there would not be a permit issued for a balcony encroaching on the right-of-way from a private building. But I'm not sure if there's anything else to be added, but those are the reasons that I'm aware of, and I'm not sure if Colin has additional information to provide.
Yeah, for sure. Through Mayor Waters, so yeah, it's with the transition of utilities from overhead to underground, essentially everything is beneath the sidewalk in front of that building. So there's I forget how many ducts, but it's a significant number of utilities, Bell, gas, telecommunications, Rogers, like they're all within that sidewalk, hydro as well. So to be setting footings and that sort of thing, I think it'd be really, really challenging. And it would represent a fairly significant encroachment into the township's road allowance. So just for those reasons, it was advised not to proceed.
Okay. My second question is on, I see that the current pitch of the roof is being pitched up higher, which is great because it kind of complements sort of what the old structure. So is there the ability in that roof to put additional space or different rooms or anything up in there, just for, you know, we're talking about intensification in our downtown abilities to You know, I just look at that roof, and maybe that's a question to the architect, but I just look at that height of that roof, and if there's the ability to have additional space up there.
Hi there, I'm Jace Martin from Martin Simmons Swears. So ideally we would like to get as many units as we can into the building, and it just makes sense. But when we looked at it, historically there would have never been anything in that space. And we didn't really want to be putting any dormers out facing onto Mill Street. So everything would be to the back, which would have meant you would have a pitched roof and then a flat roof, which would actually be over the allowable building height. I think there might have been ways to address that, but that was a large concern, and the size of the units wouldn't actually be, I think we were looking at like 400 square feet roughly for the unit. So it was a lot of effort just to get one unit. And on top of that, I think we actually had to provide 2 stairs, 2 exits. Currently there's just 1 exit. Yeah, because I think you'd be going to 4 stories, so we'd have 2 exits. So we'd love to do it, but it doesn't really kind of make sense in that setting.
Thank you for that information. Any other comments or questions from council? Okay. We have Marianne, anything else? No? Okay, thank you. Recommendation that council of the Township of Centre Wellington approves heritage permit application HP 2023-001 for alterations to the designated property municipally known as 27-43 West Mill Street, Elora, pursuant to Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, RSO 1990 C 0.118, subject to the six conditions outlined below in staff report, PLN 2023-04, dated January 30th, 2023. Do I have a mover for that? Mover, Councillor Evoy, second, Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? So moved. Thank you. Okay. Item 8.11, part lot control exemption by law, block 141, plan 61M-243. A report by, welcome back, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. This is a bylaw that's known as a part lot control exemption bylaw, and you're going to see more of these because it's pretty routine stuff. In fact, there'll be another one on the agenda next month. So a part lot control exemption bylaw is a bylaw that we pass at council in order to further divide a lot or a block on a plan of subdivision into the individual units. So typically a block of townhouses, it will first be identified as a larger block on a plan, and then through a part lot control exemption bylaw, it may get divided into the 4 or 5 or 6 individual townhouse units before they're sold. Also, semi-detached dwellings, typically, there's one dwelling on each side, and it starts off as one lot, and then it gets split down the middle. It's a part lot control that's the easier administrative way to do that. So in this particular case, it's block 141 of plan 61M-243, and it's a block in the Haylock subdivision. But in this particular case, the development is 10 single detached dwelling lots. So the part lot control bylaw here is being used to divide this larger parcel into 10 lots for single detached dwellings. So This particular development is unique in that it's a plan of condominium for single detached dwellings. We have a few of these in the township, Heritage Square in Fergus, Heritage Lane, Highland Ridge. Those are all developments that are under a plan of condominium, but so it's a private road. The road that's on this plan, Quibble Lane, is a private road. And the part lot control exemption bylaw is to create the 10 individual units for the dwellings that are going to be built on these lots. So in a part lot control exemption bylaw, what it's doing is exempting for a temporary period of time from a provision of the Planning Act that says you can only convey the whole lot and not a part lot. So the bylaw is called a part lot control exemption because we're giving it a temporary exemption so that the individual parts can be conveyed. And then when all the parts are conveyed, then the bylaw expires, and then it can't be divided further once it's been split up into the desired 10 units.
Comments, questions? Okay. Thank you, Brett. Recommendation that council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw to exempt Block 141 of Plan 61M-243 from part lot control provisions of the Planning Act. Do I have a mover for that? Oh, yes, Councillor Evoy, seconder. Councillor Jefferson, all those in favor? So moved. Welcome back. Okay, item 8.12, comprehensive linear infrastructure environmental compliance approval for wastewater and stormwater collection systems update and implementation plan. A report from Colin. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Hello, Council. This is almost as exciting as part lot control, so but not quite. So just on the theme of approvals, so we have a number of approvals that we get to operate our water, wastewater, stormwater systems, and these are typically issued by the Ministry of the Environment. And so, for example, we have one for the wastewater treatment plants in Fergus and Elora, our pumping stations, stormwater management ponds. We have an approval for the water system, right? A license from the Ministry of the Environment to run our water system. And so the approvals for our piped system, so the pipes that convey the stormwater and wastewater to the places they need to go, the ministry decided to transition from a pipe-by-pipe approval system where, okay, I want to build a pipe, so I got to get an approval for that pipe, to a system-wide approval. So basically, it's very similar to our water system now, where we have one approval for every single main, all of our system that's out there for wastewater and stormwater. And so the idea is that it's going to be a bit more efficient. It kind of takes the ministry out of the review process in terms of that we don't need a piece of paper from the ministry anymore to be able to build a new sewer, as long as it meets a set criteria, design criteria. So a bit more of an efficient process. And so the ministry's been talking about this for probably about 4 or 5 years. And the day has come. We finally have our approval. It arrived December 22nd, so just before Christmas. And it's a lengthy document. It's about 122 pages of various requirements. I think just in summary, there's a lot of things in there, but I think the main things for council to know are, again, the transition from the ministry approval for linear infrastructure to the township. So we now have the ability to authorize or issue an approval for new pipes. So whether that's subdivisions that are being constructed in the township, whether that's a new business that needs an extension of services. Quite often, even if we had to extend a pipe 20 meters to a new property, like a new development, we'd have to go to the ministry. So those days are over, which is a great thing. So that's a real improvement. Should speed approvals up for sure. On the other side of things, on the operations side, we have to have kind of our operational and maintenance manuals kind of put together. And really, I think the main thing there is the ministry is going to make sure we've got all our procedures documented, that we're kind of doing what we say we're supposed to do in terms of maintaining our systems, and there's some kind of new maintenance benchmarks that we need to meet. Also, there's new annual reports now. Yay! So we're getting into annual report season. Council will see in February our water, source protection, and wastewater annual reports. We're just working on those now. And starting in 2024, there's going to be a linear wastewater and stormwater report coming to council. So we're actually getting ready this year to prepare for those reports because they're for this actual reporting cycle in 2023. And so, yeah, that's kind of a summary. Happy to answer any questions, but a fairly significant change to kind of the regulatory framework that we operate under. So, yeah, just wanted to bring that forward to council. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Council, comments, questions for Colin here? You're getting off light there, Colin. Anyways, thank you for that. Here we go. Recommendation, the Council of Township of Centre Wellington receive as information update on the Township Consolidated Linear Infrastructure Environmental Compliance Approval for Sanitary and Stormwater Collection System and Implementation Plan. That's a mouthful. Do we have a mover for that? Mover McAdams? Seconder? Adams, sorry. Maybe I'm thinking McDonald's or something. Yes, Councillor McDonald. All those in seconder? All those in favor? Okay, we're all in favor. It's been a long day. So, anyways, thank you. Okay, item 8.13 has been pulled. Item 8.14, Township Partnership Program report from, oh yes, Ms. Drexler, yes. Welcome.
All right, through you, Mayor Waters. In 2016, Council directed staff to generate additional revenue through the sale of sponsorships and naming rights of Centre Wellington assets. There was a policy created in 2016, and in 2017, a third-party sponsorship management company was hired to execute the plan, and then later that contract was rescinded. Now we are in 2023 and have a staff team that has experience with procuring sponsorships within the Community Services Department, and this can now happen internally with the resources that we have, keeping the full funding internal rather than paying a third-party organization. So in the package for council, there is a policy which outlines in great detail who the township could work with and how the township could enter agreements. The next piece is the delegation of authority, which ultimately delegates authority to the CAO and the Managing Director of Community Services, and outlines that a multi-departmental staff working group for 2023 will inform decisions that are made. And the last piece in the package is the rates and charges bylaw, which already has some of the assets listed, but there is a proposal to add a statement to be added for new assets not already in the rates and charges bylaw. So one of the benefits of having an intentional community partnership program is that all of the efforts that we were doing in silos will come under one centralized place, so staff not only see the big picture for the township, but also for the partners, that they know that someone is working to find the opportunities that best suit them out of all of the opportunities that the township has. So having the community partners having the community partner with the township means that we can have more opportunities accessible to all families. It means that we can provide healthy and active living in Centre Wellington in more inclusive ways. It's about helping children and youth have more opportunities to reach their full potential. And it's also about building a community with strong connections while building a safer and stronger community. So each agreement that the township enters needs to be a win-win-win. So the win for the community is when the community members are able to enjoy amenities that might not otherwise be offered, or if they were, they would have been offered at a higher cost to the individual. The win for the community partner is that by speaking to one staff member, they can reach their audience, raise their profile, grow their business, help build community, and inspire excellence, all while elevating our township. And the win for the township of Centre Wellington is that we can generate consistent messaging, centralize the inventory of assets, steward relationships with community partners, collaborate efficiently with different divisions of the township and the community groups, but also, as was brought up in 2016, leverage the partnership's opportunities to generate additional streams of revenue. So this is an example of an advertising opportunity that we could present to a community partner, a common one for other municipalities, the arena takeover. It includes glass wrapping, change room door wrapping, an in-ice logo or a board ad, sturdy skate helpers that can be stacked for adults with different abilities as well. Centralizing the sponsorship and naming rights allows staff to get creative and get our community partners noticed in our arenas, in our parks, and on our trails. Whether they want to support the environment, the sports, the arts, youth, or seniors, the township has opportunities in virtually every interest group a partner could ever want. So the package is also proposing a delegation of authority to our CAO and our Managing Director of Community Services. Essentially, this is because the sponsor is entitled to their own privacy as an entity who's responsible to their own stakeholders. And this is hard to give them when council meets in a very transparent and public forum. Also allowing this to happen at a staff level allows for a faster response time to negotiate partnerships. However, anything that falls outside of the policy's parameters would obviously come back to council for consideration. And when we have significant partnerships, that'll also come back to council as a report to council as a good news story. And lastly, all partnerships will come back through a report through the delegation authority bylaw. And now I will throw it back to you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, Councillor Evoy.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I am so excited about this. I think everyone at this council recognizes Ms. Drexler's skill around fundraising and organizing and working with community partners and stakeholders. And I think this is a perfect fit and a great idea. And I do look forward to seeing how this rolls out. I'm a little bit curious about, are we doing what is your reach out going to look like? You don't need to go into detail at this time, but I certainly look forward to seeing what your plans are around that. But personally, I am very excited to see this move forward, and it is a triple win.
Councillor Wilton.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. That's a great presentation. So as you know, I had a question I sent to you earlier today. Just curious about the signage and amount of advertising that might take over green spaces within our community. Just thinking that it is important that when you're in nature and on a trail, you want to forget about all that stuff and kind of escape a little bit. So I'm hoping we can maybe we can amend the motion here to say something like that advisory group would work on some thoughts around that, the amount of signage and the type of signage in our natural spaces within the community. So if you have comments on that.
Through you, Mayor. So one of the things that I had mentioned to you earlier is that the second paragraph in the policy, all sponsorships and naming rights shall be consistent with the township's vision, mission, and values and will not compromise or contradict any other bylaw or policy of the township or reflect negatively on the township's public image. So I think that staff are in agreement that that is something that we want to make sure is upheld. And in the other thing that I had mentioned was in the agreement with RTO4, they outlined with us, in collaboration with us, that we want to become Ontario's idyllic experience showcasing our natural settings, heritage towns, and arts and culture. So we're definitely on the same page and agree with that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay. We have a recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw to adopt the community partnership program for the Township of Centre Wellington sponsorship and naming rights policies as outlined in report CS 2023-04 as of January 30th, 2023, and that Council amend the 2023 fees and charges bylaw Schedule A is attached to this report, and that Council execute a bylaw to delegate authority for the sponsorship naming rights to the Managing Director of Community Services and Chief Administration Officer. Do you have a mover for that? Yes, Councillor Craddock, seconder. Councillor Adams. All those in favor? So moved. Okay. Item 8.15, Township of Centre Wellington Community Impacts Grants.
Okay. So there have been many amendments to the grants program over the last 15 years as the program has grown and evolved. The categories, the capped amounts, the names of the programs, all of these factors have slightly changed over the years. But at the same time, there are key things that have never changed, like wanting to support as many key community initiatives as possible and making space specifically for arts and culture. So the intent of this proposed policy is to make the process more efficient for both township staff processing the grants and for the community groups applying, while making more funding accessible to the groups doing incredibly great work to benefit our community. With the changes made, there is a more efficient delivery by staff and a more efficient process for grant applicants. There's a clear direction for the funding from the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. The intention of previous councils in the practice and intent is still present while new capital grant possibilities are integrated. This is specifically around the intent to support initiatives that involve arts and culture. There is also a more simplified review process of the grant funding for the appropriate committee of council and staff, and most importantly, the community groups. Most importantly, to the community groups, there is a more flexible basis for funding opportunities while keeping focused on the purpose of the funds. So in the policy, it lays out the parameters around the three streams that are being proposed. The policy talks about the community impact grant, capital stream, the community impact grant, project and programming stream, and lastly, the community impact grant annual specific stream. At a very high level, the differences between the streams are on the screen. Capital grants need to be applied for by stable not-for-profits in the community that show that they have the capacity to follow through with the project. The other two streams can be projects and programs that are delivered by not-for-profits, service clubs, or organized community groups. The asterisk on the based in CW is because if it is an Indigenous group that is not based out of Centre Wellington or serves the community as well as other communities and based out of another area, that would be eligible under this new policy. The ask for capital is capped at $20,000, while projects and programming and annual specific are capped at $5,000. However, the annual specific amounts will be reviewed annually at budget time for consideration from council to increase the amounts given according to the Ontario Consumer Price Index. The other asterisk beside who can apply and maximum ask is because these amendments, because of part of the amendment is to allow for letters of intent to allow an idea to get through that requires special consideration. For example, a one-time special build or a project that fills a need that might not be required again. In this instance, someone who would normally not be eligible could submit a letter of intent up to 2 weeks before the deadline that they are intending on submitting an application for consideration. The piece that might be most exciting for the community groups is that they can be an annual specific grant recipient and also apply for a grant for a program that they've been waiting to get going. or they can have a great idea for 2 different programs targeted to help 2 very different underserved groups in our community. The goal is still to serve as many groups as possible, but if there is a need, they can apply and council can decide how to allocate those funds. In the council package was 2 internal working documents that demonstrate how the scoring will protect the initial wish of council to support arts and culture initiatives. Weighting will be in favor of initiatives that bring arts and culture based on projects and programs to our community. So in terms of timeline and process, we're in a unique time being that this has been an election year. So first I'll go through how the timeline and process would normally look, and then we can look at the plan for 2023. So normally we would launch this program in early September with an information session to get the community educated about the streams and have the opportunity to ask any questions. The application deadline would be mid-October, so the letter of intent deadline would be 2 weeks prior to that. Staff would compile the applications and bring it to the applicable advisory council in November, and that group would put together recommendations for council. Then in December, that recommendation would come to council, and once passed, staff would create agreements for grants that are over $5,000, which could be capital asks or asks granted acceptance through the letter of intent process. However, for this year, time is tight, being an election year. So for 2023, the goal would be to launch the community impact grants as soon as possible and offer an information session with the community in February. The application deadline would be in March with the letters of intent due 2 weeks prior. And in lieu of an applicable council advisory committee this year, the proposal is to use a multi-departmental staff working group to look through the applications in April and bring a recommendation to council in May. Projects would still be required to wrap up by December 31st of 23, with capital grants being able to extend to December 31st, 2024. Lastly, in council's package is a list of the annual specific grant recipients with an addition of the Elora Environmental Center. The Tree Trust program is a way to offset carbon footprint by the township for the impact that our ways of doing business have on the environment. The approval of these grants would normally come to council at budget time. However, we're asking that council pre-approve these grants to allow these groups to continue with their programming and planning for the great work that they do for our community. Thank you, and back to you, Mayor Waters.
Comments, questions? Yes.
Through you, Mayor Waters. So these grant funds, you're taking it out of the OLG funds or the taxes that you get, the 60,000 or the 100,000?
The specific annuals?
So we have, there's 2 ways that we can fund. So the taxation would be covering the annual specific grants and the projects and programming. We also have the OLG funds that would be covering capital, and depending on how many requests there are, could offset the cost of the projects and programming.
Okay, perfect. And just another question through you, Mayor. Wellington County Farm and Home Safety Association. Do they ask for grants from all townships representing Wellington County, or it's just us?
Through you, Mayor Waters. I'm not sure if they ask to other municipalities. It is one of those annual specific grants that through COVID we're not able to use their funding. So it would be working with them to make sure that they have the intent that they have for the funding for 23 would be able to be used by the end of the year.
Fair enough. Looking at them, they're all, you know, I'm really happy to see them funded for sure. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Any other comment? Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Kristen. I was just curious with the annual specific grants, how do organizations find out about that opportunity? Is that posted somewhere, or if you can describe that? Thanks.
Through you, Mayor Waters. That's a great question. In the past, it has been a little bit more passive, but that would be something that would be coming through that information session with the community that I'm really excited to bring to them to make it very clear and to make sure that the process is very clear and efficient for the applicants. We do advertise through the paper and I believe radio as well, and on our social media, and it's on our website. So making sure that those pieces are there, but also through community development, making sure that we have those relationships and are stewarding those relationships with community groups and making sure that they know that they're there.
Councillor Adams and then Councillor Craddock.
I was just going to add to that answer, and I think the CAO can maybe back me up because it's back in the history of these grants, but I believe the list that is compiled now are groups that continue to apply year after year after year, and eventually were then granted that status by council. So that's, I believe, how the groups got on there now, and that's how we would continue to steward that opportunity for groups to get on it. And obviously, this tree trust was one that was bumped up early. So I just want to explain the history on that, and I'm not sure if I'm correct in that.
Yes.
Yeah, and through Mayor Waters, that's correct. We felt it was inappropriate to have these groups apply year after year after year when it was something that we were consistently funding from year to year. So the decision was made to have this annual specific grant category, and but they still have to show their intent to receive that annual specific amount, but it's a less rigorous exercise.
Thank you for that history. Yes.
Through you, Mayor. Just a question on the evaluation criteria. So down in the second section under initiative, the first one, does this initiative promote arts or culture opportunity for the community? Can you tell me again why, because we had this kind of discussion before, like where, you know, things like the environment and recreation, indoor and outdoor, also felt kind of under that community services umbrella. And I know going through a lot of grants previously through CSAC, like any of those kind of areas, why is there special significance given to particularly arts and culture, excluding things like recreation or environment?
Through you, Mayor Waters. That's a great question. I think that in the past we have seen a lot more, we have been able to support recreation and sport through different things like fee subsidies in the recreation facilities, whereas we didn't necessarily have that same opportunity to support arts and culture. So this was one of those ways through the OLG funding that we were able to support the arts and culture. And I think that it's also important to note that the definition of culture is very broad and not necessarily understood by the community of how many things that can actually encompass. So we're really looking forward to this structure being able to help more groups be able to accomplish what they're trying to do.
Follow-up comment, and I do see the way that it's written, that I can definitely see that happening. I just, wasn't sure. So maybe within there, maybe redefining what our definitions are of those might be helpful too, but great job. Thank you.
Councillor Craddock?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Kristen. For your applicants, whether they be individuals or organizations, is there, or how do you qualify their ability to manage the funds and follow up? Is there like accountability if there's mismanagement?
Through you, Mayor. So for the capital, I think you're speaking specifically to the capital grant requests, and there's a different set of qualifying questions in that application for those specific requests. And then we have also talked about building the agreement that's based on whatever the amount is, and a schedule of dispersing the fees, and frequent check-ins with them and different things. All of that would be outlined in the agreement.
If I can just add to that, sorry. For the other grants, the programming grants, the ones under $5,000, there is still a requirement for the group to report back before the end of the year or at the end of the year, that they have completed their objectives, how the money was spent. There's a follow-up that they must be required to do. And then if they haven't submitted that, then they are not eligible for another grant until they wrap that up. So that is part of the check-in process, I guess you would say. And in the capital or larger grants, if a group was asking for a larger sum of money, then typically what the municipality does is gives that out in chunks. Here's some startup, here's some rest of it, and a holdback until you're completing your project. So that's how we make sure that we're not just writing checks and saying, see ya. So I'm hoping that answers some of your questions. Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Kirsten. We have a recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington authorize the Mayor and Clerk to execute a bylaw to adopt community impact grant policy, and that Council pre-approve Schedule A as attached to the report, CS 2023-01 for the award of annual specific grants for 2023. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Craddock, seconder. Councillor Wilton, all those in favor? So moved. Item 9, these are just information items. Okay, and then if there's any questions, yes. Okay. And then, okay, just bylaw 2023-10, we'll have to vote on that separately just because of your, sorry? Yep. Okay, so I'll just start to go through the bylaws that way. So bylaws, and sorry for this, but here we go. 2023-01, a bylaw to adopt the Community Partnership Program for the Township of Centre Wellington Sponsorship and Naming Rights Policy. 2023-05, a bylaw to amend bylaw 2016-0401 as amended, being the delegation of authority by bylaw for the Corporation of the Township of Centre Wellington. 2023-06, a bylaw to add Schedule A Park to recreation to bylaw 2023-01, being a bylaw to establish the fees and charges of the various services provided by the municipality. 2023-07, a bylaw to appoint members to the board of the management of the Fergus and Elora business improvement areas pursuant to S 2004 3 of the Municipal Act as amended, and to repeal bylaws 2015-006 and 2022-007. 2023-08, bylaw to provide for maintenance and repair to snow drainage works and for the borrowing on the credit of the municipality the amount required for such works. 2023-09, a bylaw to provide for maintenance and repairs to the Bailey Drainage Works -A and C drainage for the borrowing on the credit of the municipality, the amount required for such works. Now I'm going to jump over to 2023-11, a bylaw to adopt the Community Impact Grant Policy. 2023-12, a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute an extension agreement between Corporation of Township of Centre Wellington and the Corporation of Guelph Aramasa and the Guelph Humane Society. Recommendation that bylaw 2023-04 through 2023-12, and not that one, 2000, be read a first and second time and passed and signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal affixed. Do we have a mover on that? Yes. Councillor Adams, Councillor McDonald, all those in favor? Okay. So I'm just going to go back and read bylaw, and you can't, yes. And then 2023-10, a bylaw to exempt block 141, Plan 61M-243, Township Central Wellington from part lot control provision of the Planning Act. Do I have a mover on that? Mover Jefferson, Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? So moved. Okay, I think I got through that. Any notice of motions?
No.
Okay. What's that?
They'd have to be there.
Yes,
so no.
okay. Confirmatory bylaw. A bylaw to confirm the actions of council recommendation that bylaw 2023-13 to confirm the proceeding of council at the meeting held January 30th, 2023 be introduced a first and second and a third time and passed in open council. Do I have a mover for that? Mover Adams, Councillor Whitten. All those in favor? So moved. And then an adjournment, we need a mover for that as well. Councillor Craddock. I'm out of here. Councillor McDonald, all those in favor? And thank you for your time. Good night.